Good morning. Interesting, the text that was chosen. I'm going to read just a little bit farther because it'll have pertinence to my testimony. Always be prepared to give a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for your hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, that when you are slandered, those who revile you, your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. It is better to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. I don't have any great massive conversion change. I remember going through high school where people would get up and say they got into this and then they got out of it and so forth. As far back as I can remember, I prayed to Jesus like he was sitting on the end of the bed. And I had a close relationship with God. As I matured, I began to understand who it was that was gracious enough to talk to me. And when you look in Job 38, you get an idea when God corrected Job as to who he was and who Job was. And you look at Psalms 8, and who is man that you are mindful of him? And I gained a respect for who it was I was addressing. But as I prayed every time I studied for understanding. I prayed every time I took tests. I prayed every time I made a major decision and leaned hard on the Lord, and he has always been gracious. In fact, I asked him for 6 months whether I should marry my beautiful wife, and after 6 months, I said, well, if she's not the right one, it's your fault. I asked you for 6 months. So I was blessed with grades that were better than my brain was capable of. I got into a residency in ortho, which was, I didn't realize at the time, was very lucky to do. When I went back down to teach, it was the top 5% in medical schools by then that got in. It must have been easier when I got in, but I was lucky to get into ortho, had a good practice here, had a good family, and so one day I remember asking the Lord, you've been so good to me. What do you want me to do? And I got an answer back. And he said, I want it now, and I want it big. So luckily I have a godly wife, and we chose to respond to that. And I would refer you to Malachi, where it says, if you bring in the tithe into the storehouse, and if you do, I will open the windows of heaven. And God has certainly done that for us. We have never been able to outgive the Lord. Now, I hesitate to say anything about that and make my wife nervous that we would be bragging about doing anything, and that's not true, because anything we have is his, not ours to begin with. And, you know, there are like 5 people, I think I heard in a sermon once, that were identified specifically by Christ. One of those 5 was the widow that gave her 2 mites. That is real giving. I have never given out of need. I have given out of plenty. And I've been blessed to have the privilege of redistributing some of the things that God has given, because it is so much fun to do that good for others. I've always wanted to teach, and I've wanted to do medicine, and one thing for sure, I didn't want to be someone that taught who everybody said you went into teaching because you couldn't get into medicine. And so I got into medicine, and then I always loved to teach. So in 2010, I got an opportunity to go back to Loma Linda and teach. They asked me when I finished if I wanted to stay and teach, and my wife reminded me that I promised to bring her home. So we came home for 25 years, and then I got a chance to go back. And she was gracious enough to give up her friends and family here and to go down to Southern California. Interesting, when I first came back to Idaho from Southern California, everybody said, why would you want to go to Idaho? When I went back 25 years later, they said, why would you leave Idaho and come back to Southern California? So anyway, Loma Linda turned out to be very hard on me. Academic politics are brutal. And even in a Christian institution, they can be pretty rough. I learned a couple very valuable lessons when I was there that are the reason I put them in this testimony, because they had a large influence on my walk with God. I learned what slander was in a very personal way. There were two of us that were in the final running for chairman of the department. I was selected, and the individual that was not selected, I didn't understand the depth to which someone that was disappointed and ambitious would go to destroy someone else's reputation. So it was a rough time as far as that goes. But the beauty of that is I learned what slander was on a very personal relation. In fact, and the readings that I did in Tonstad's books, which I would recommend to you, they're not easy reading. In fact, the first book I read, I thought, boy, you got a big vocabulary and you're showing it off. And then after I read more of his work, I realized, no, he's just very precise and accurate and has a bigger vocabulary than I have. So I really learned a lot. And in one of his books, The God of Sense and the Traditions of Nonsense, he really lays out a case for how Satan slandered God and influenced us against God and his way of doing things and influenced heaven. If you think about it, in Ezekiel, when it talks about the lament for the king of Tyre, which is talking about him, Ezekiel 28, about Satan, it says, you were the covering cherub. That means that he was closest to God. He walked in the stones of fire. Therefore, he would represent God. So when he says something about God, he would have a lot of influence because he was close. He was a covering cherub. He was responsible for God's reputation. And you think about it, his tail swept a third of the angels, a third of the stars from heaven. It was actually his tail of lies because he misrepresented God's character. Now, having understood what slander does, because there's nothing you can do about slander but let the truth come out over time. The more you protest, the more they wonder if it isn't true. You know, you just can't do much about it. Well, that's the position that our God was in when the covering cherub chose to slander him. So gaining that understanding was invaluable to me, to looking at God, and also becoming jealous for God's character and looking at how the Christian church and many of us have done damage to God's character by the things we choose to do. I think the ultimate was the doctrine of eternal hellfire. That's worse than Auschwitz. And for the Christian church to represent God as willing to do that has just been terrible. But anyway, through all that, I fell more deeply in love with God, more profoundly impressed with his character and his willingness to love us in spite of ourselves and to be patient and preserve our freedom of will. Jesus certainly came down and did a beautiful job of tearing the veil open so that we could see past the lies of Satan into what the character of God was truly like. That I understand. How the blood of an innocent being justifies those that are not innocent, I am still working on. I'm still working on trying to understand that, because in no sense, in any legal court that I'm aware of, an innocent person sacrificed does not justify or cleanse the one that is guilty. So I'm still working on, because it's clear in Scripture that he was appropriation for our sins, that we're cleansed by his blood, and I get that, and I accept that. I'm just trying to understand it, because I think there's more depth to that than I have been able to comprehend so far. So that's where I am in my testimony. I'm surprised my voice is shaky. It is much easier to do a total hip than this, but thank you for your time.
Good morning, church family. My name is Andrea. I was born in the northern central part of Brazil. I'm the oldest of 4 girls and raised Adventist. As growing up, I was very involved in church. At age 9, I decided to give my life to Jesus. At age 11, I was on the primary Sabbath school teachers. And at age 13 years old, I was part of the church choir, and we will go sing at the other churches. And also, I was giving Bible studies and participating in a group that would serenade for people that were out of church. Like you see, I was very involved in church, but I didn't have a relationship with Jesus. In Matthew 7:24-27 says, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who will build his house on the rock, and the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on the house. But it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell. And great was the fall of it." So I attended a private Catholic school all my life. And during my junior year in high school, I decided to get more involved in sport. And as I was dedicating more in sport, I was having less time to go to church. The school team traveled to other cities to play soccer, ping pong, and volleyball. And less I was going to church. My mom was very disappointed and wasn't happy at all. But on the other hand, my dad, being a soccer player, a fanatic in sport, was giving me all the support as I needed. My dad always was a role model for me. I admired him for being a hard worker, an athletic person, and still have time to plant a garden. So when I turned 15 years old, my dad gave me a big surprise birthday party. He invited everyone from church, the Pathfinders, and as I was growing church, I was involved in Pathfinder also, and he invited few friends of school. So after everybody left from the party was gone, my dad gave me a gift. It was a Bible. And he kissed me, and he walked inside the house. He came out with 2 luggage. I was very confused, lost, and didn't know what's happening. As my dad was walking out of the house, I ran to him and asked him what he was doing. He just looked at me and said, "Your mom kicked me out. Kicked me out of the house. We are getting divorced." I cry out like a baby and I want to go with him. Sorry about that. And he told me, "You need to stay and take care of your younger sisters." That day that was supposed to be the happiest day of my life just became the worst day of my life. I couldn't believe what was happening. And from that moment, I became a rebellious teenager. To show my mom that I wasn't happy about my dad wasn't part of the family anymore. I left the church. I didn't want to keep the Sabbath anymore. I put my Bible away. I remember one day going to work, because I worked since I was 13 years old. I left home and I came back with skirt. Né? In Latin culture, when you are Christian, we have a lot of restrictions, like we don't wear pants, we don't cut in our hair, like short, like I have right now, and we don't wax, a lot of, back then in the 1970s. So I walk away from the house, and when I came back with the red pants. My mom looked at me and was in shock because she saw me that with clothes that she never thought that I'm going to use. So my mom never quit on me, and she prayed every day for God to protect and bring me back to church. Ellen G. White wrote, "The prayer of a Christian mother are not disregarded by the Father of all. He will not turn away your petitions and leave you and yours to the buffeting of Satan in the great day of final conflict. It is for you to work with simplicity and faithfulness, and God will establish the work of your hands." Review in Herald, April 23, 1889. So for 10 years, I was living the mundane life, going to parties, drinking, have fun. Until one day I found out I was pregnant. That news changed my life, upside down. I didn't know what to do. I was too young to become a mother. I didn't have a career. I wasn't making enough money to support a kid. And then I decided to take a further step. I went to the pharmacy and bought pills to have abortion. I was ready to take them when I hear a small voice inside me saying, "Don't do it. Don't do it, another mistake." I knew that voice was from the Holy Spirit talking to me. I threw the meds away and made a decision to raise my kid with or without any help. When I told my mom the big news, she hugged me and said, "I will help you raise your child, my daughter." I called my dad, and he also said the same words. My mom helped me with everything, even more than I needed. On the other hand, my dad didn't give me a lot of support, especially financially. I was very disappointed with my dad. More when I found out that he left home to be living with another woman much younger than my mom, and they already have a 2-year-old daughter. My mom never exposed my dad's life to us. The model dad that I always thought he was quickly disappearing from my mind. I began to put my life in order, raise my boy with good morals, and decided to stop going to parties. But I wasn't ready to go back to church yet. Alex's dad, my oldest son, didn't take a responsibility as a father. We tried to live together, but he had different way how to raise a kid. So I decided to raise my son Alex alone. I was a single mother going to college to finish my schooling. I was working full-time and going to school full-time. It wasn't easy at all. It was a tough time in my life, but I accomplished my goals and graduated. One night, I woke up and couldn't go back to sleep. Think of my life in church and how much I was happy when I was in church. I kneeled down and prayed to God if it was His will for me to go back to church, He would send me a Christian man that loves God, accept myself and my son as his own, and love us with all his heart. Time passed, And one day I heard from my mom that a group of Adventist missionaries from the U.S. was coming to build a church in the poorest side of town, Novo Planalto. I was excited in meeting them. I thought everyone from church was going to judge me because I was a single mother. One of the members of the church was going to get married and personally invited me to go to the wedding. Everyone from church was invited, including the missionaries. I went to the wedding ceremony and the reception. At the reception, my sister and I sat around the table where a handsome American man named Manny Rosas was sitting. As time passed, I decided to give my life back to Jesus, and I don't ever regret it. I can't wait to thank him face to face for always watching over me, forgiving my sins, and giving me opportunity to have eternal life in Jesus Christ. Thank you.
Well, I only have 3 minutes left. That's going to be good for me. But happy Sabbath, everyone. I'm not a public speaker, just so you know. Everyone has a story, but not everyone has a testimony. Hi, my name is Manny Rosas. I was born in Nayarit, a West Coast state of Mexico in the late 1970s. I remember since I was a little child, my mother would take me and my older brother to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. She was a single mother and worked all day to help support us. My father had passed away in a car accident while traveling on a dangerous highway when I was only 2 years old. So my mother didn't have the opportunity to stay home and spend a lot of time, one-on-one time with us. My brother and I would be out all day in the neighborhood after school playing football, also known as soccer. Saturday mornings, my mom, brother, and I would walk about 15 blocks to attend church every week. It seemed so long to get there. Even in the evenings, we would return for Vespers. Once in a while, we were lucky enough to have extra money to pay for public transportation and return back home. One day, my mother was invited to come move in with her sisters in California. I was turning 9 years old when we made the journey and arrived to Salinas, California, about 20 minutes from beautiful Monterey and Carmel. I started 4th grade here, not speaking a single word of English other than the word candy. My brother and I attended Monterey Peninsula Adventist School for 3 years. I was culturally shocked here. Nobody played with that nice round soccer ball, but instead that weird-shaped ball, what we call football. And the students were very ethnic diverse, very different than I was used to. Time passed and I soon began middle school, but it would be my first time at a public school. It was there where I saw how much more different public schools were than the private Christian schools. I was exposed to students cursing and misbehaving badly. It was so bad that I was peer pressured to act the same way and even getting initiated into one of the local gang rivals. I began to speak and dress like them. I thought this was cool and felt like I fit in, but I began getting into trouble. By that time, my mother had met and married her husband. I wasn't living with them as I stayed at my aunt's house since we arrived here to the U.S. But soon I was forced to live in with my mom, brother, and my stepdad. He was not Adventist, but a good Christian man. I remember my mom and brother getting baptized into the Adventist church. I wanted to get baptized too, but my mom told me I wasn't ready yet. So I planned and received Bible studies, and a year later, after them, I was baptized into the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Gilroy, California. I was 13 years old when I gave my life to the Lord. I slowly began to separate myself from the gangsters and instead was looking into getting into sports as a way to keep me out of trouble. Besides, I was always physically active. In high school, I played freshman football, and my last 3 years, I ran varsity cross country and track and field. I was going to church with my family, but I would always want to sit in the back pew and not really pay attention. My heart wasn't fully committed to Jesus as much as it was in sports. By the time I went to junior college, one of my cross-country teammates invited me to start drinking while working at the same place, at a place similar to Chuck E. Cheese. By that time, I was only going to church because it was a tradition to go. Again, I continued to sit in the back of the church, but my mind was not into the services. I thought to myself, why would I want to live a double life? So I left the church when I was about 19 years old, and for the next 5 years, I was partying every weekend with friends and coworkers, going from nightclubs to house parties to drinking at the office while I was working. I did not want anything to do with God and church. By the way, my coworkers were also drinking, and they were the owners, so I didn't get in trouble. That's the bad part of it. I did though, while I worked there. I did not want to do anything with God and church. I did, though, for whatever reason, wanted to continue to give my tithe and offerings to God as I was working in Monterey as a computer-aided drafter designer. So I remember telling my brother to take my tithe and offering and dropping it off at the church for me. And he said, no way. If you want to give your tithe and offering, then you should go do it yourself. I said, no way. As a matter of fact, I went deeper into the world and began to question if there truly was a God and that this was all just made up. So I hid my Bible where I would not easily remember it. One of my mom's sisters that wasn't a Christian could not even believe that I didn't even believe that God even existed. But I continued to live in what I thought was a happy time in my life. All of my closest coworkers in Monterey drank except one. His name was Matthew, and he was very different than the rest of us. His family was Egyptian and was a bit younger than me. He got to know my story of how I was just drinking and partying and that I had been out of the church. He was Christian and was attending Calvary Chapel. Even though he didn't like me much because he thought I was too cocky, one day he invited me to go study the Bible with him and the college and career men's Bible study group. I quickly turned him down. He invited me again on another day, and again I said no. He kept bothering me and always asking me to go with him. He was so persistent that one day I finally gave in and said just this one time so he could forever leave me alone. We went, and I didn't think much of it afterwards, but he continued to invite me, and slowly I began to accept more invitations to study the Word. My heart began to soften for God's open arms for me. I began to fall in love with God in a way I've never experienced it before. I later found that Matthew and the group had been praying for me this whole time before I even met them. My mother was noticing that I no longer was coming home intoxicated late at nights, but rather I was staying put and not going out with my worldly friends. I later found out that she too was praying for me for this whole time I was out of the church. She welcomed me back to the Seventh-day Adventist church, so I went with her to the small bilingual local church in King City, California. For the first time in my life, I wanted so bad to serve God in any ministry. I felt that God really cared for me and was saving me through all the drinking and driving, even though I got into a car accident once. So I prayed about serving God in any ministry. The Salinas Seventh-day Adventist pastor would come down once a month to King City to preach. And out of the blue, John Coelho, a Brazilian-American pastor, asked me if I wanted to serve in the Salinas Pathfinder Club as a director. Without a thought to it, I said yes. I was in Pathfinders in and out, mostly out, when I was a teen. I didn't know much what I was doing when I was put in charge, but I didn't care. I had lost 5 years of my youth in the world, and now all I wanted to do was to serve the Lord. The King City Church quickly put me to work once they knew I spoke Spanish, so they had me translate the sermons from English to Spanish side by side with the head elder. The biggest opportunity came to serve the Lord, at least I thought, when Pastor John Coelho asked me if I wanted to go on a mission trip to Brazil with him and other members from other SDA churches to go build a church. Without hesitation, I said I would love to go. So in 2003, I began to save up and prepare by obtaining my American passport, visa, vaccinations, and started learning Portuguese so I could communicate a little bit with the local people. As the time got closer to departing to Brazil, my church family and relatives began teasing me that I would meet and fall in love with a Brazilian girl. Crazy guy, crazy people. I would quickly stop the teasing and say to them, no, I am not going there. I'm going there to do God's word, to go build a church in Brazil. Was I wrong? We finally arrived, and us Americans began building the church with brick and mud and got pretty far in 2 weeks while we were there. Very hot and dry place, but we accomplished a lot. I met Andrea a couple of days before leaving her hometown of Porto Nacional, Tocantins. She had a beautiful smile, and I felt comfortable talking to her. I had left my contact information. When we got back to the States, I was so excited to go on another mission trip. I wanted to explore other parts of the world. Right away, Pastor John Coelho invited me to go to Romania with him on another mission trip. It was too soon, and I wasn't ready financially and didn't have any more time off work as I spent 3 weeks in Brazil. So I stayed behind, but Andrea and I kept in touch via emails and long-distance calling, all in Portuguese. I was so excited to continue to communicate with her so the following year, in 2004, we made plans to spend and get to know each other more. So I flew to Brazil all by myself with my Portuguese accent and spent 3 weeks with her and her family. I came back home brokenhearted, not knowing if I would ever see her again. So in 2005, we made plans to get married. I flew back and brought her and her handsome young boy, Alex, up to California, and soon we got married, and I became an instant dad to this very outgoing, strong 5-year-old boy who liked to talk a lot, and he thought everyone knew what he was talking about as he spoke Portuguese. I'm blessed to be here today with my family, as we have over time added 2 more handsome boys that Andrea has given me. I learned that God was always there for me, even though I had turned my back to him. He was always patient with me and us. Deuteronomy 3:16 says, "Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." Amen.
Shall we bow our heads for closing prayer? Our Heavenly Father, we want to thank you so much for being so gracious for all of us, for chasing us even though we don't deserve it, and giving us grace that we don't deserve, and a loving family to be part of. We want to praise you and thank you for spending 1/7 of time with us on your holy Sabbath day. Amen.